Hey Rich,
What are you up to?
just having a bit of a read and a cheeky protein shake.
Oh, a cheeky protein shake. I have some questions for you about protein.
Far away.
So, what is protein?
Protein forms the structural foundation to the majority of the things within the body. So it's a structural component of the cell membrane. It features in the cytoplasm of those cells and in the organelles of those cells that deal with all the little processes that keep that cell, an activity that take place within that cell. It also increases the rate at which certain metabolic processes take place within the body, forming part of chemical pathways, and it provides the structural foundation for skin, hair, and most importantly, muscles.
Okay, so it sounds like it's important stuff. How much protein do we need in a day?
So the standard statement is that your recommended daily allowance would be 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight. However, if you're training, then you instantly increase that to 1.2 grams per kilo of body weight. And if you're training fairly hard or fairly rigorously as an athlete, then you need to be looking at about 1.6 grams per kilo body weight as a minimum, maybe even up to 2.2 grams in certain sports like bodybuilding. But 1.6 grams should suffice for most people.
Okay, so what happens if I fall out of that range?
So if you fall out of that range, then you'll see issues with other areas where protein is important, but primarily we'll see issues in terms of performance, in terms of a drop in recovery time, a reduction in the amount of protein that we synthesize and build, and a reduction in performance as a result of that. So you might see a diminished amount of strength output, etc.
Okay, and what about the amount of protein I need in a single meal?
So this is an interesting one because it's a bit outdated. We used to think that people could only really process between 20 and 25 grams of protein per meal, maybe up to 30 grams, but beyond that we didn't really see a statistically significant improvement in the amount of muscle protein synthesis that took place as a result of that dose. So it was decided that anything above 30 grams was unnecessary, and that most people should aim to stick between kind of 20 and 25 grams per serving.
Okay, but what about all those people that are now doing intermittent fasting and maybe eating only, in some cases one meal a day? How are they making gains?
So back when you were eating 6 meals a day, it was really easy to hit your targets. But now that people are eating and following intermittent fasting protocols, it's quite clear that we are able to still hit our protein requirements and absorb as much protein as we need from maybe 1 or 2 meals in a given day. So what that actually suggests is that we're able to absorb far more protein than we once thought.
Okay, and are there other factors at play there?
So there's a few factors at play. So realistically, we know now from science that there isn't a limit to how much protein can be absorbed by the body, so long as we're taking that protein in incomplete forms. And we also know that although we don't necessarily see an increase in the amount of muscle protein synthesis that takes place as a result of an increased dose above 30 grams, what we do see is we see a reduction in the amount of muscle protein breakdown that takes place. So there's a net gain in terms of the amount of muscle protein that remains due to us increasing that dose further. The type of protein that we consume, so whether that's a fast releasing protein or a slow releasing protein, is key, because if you're having a fast releasing protein, then you have less time to absorb the protein from that source. However, if we have a slow releasing protein, then we have more time to absorb all the protein from that source. So we can probably consume higher doses with slower releasing proteins, and combining the two will probably have the best effect overall. The other thing we can think about is the amount of the other foods that we eat with that protein. So if we eat a full meal with proteins, carbohydrates, and fats, then that's going to slow the transit time down even further. So again, giving us more time to absorb more protein. The only thing to potentially consider is that things like high fiber intake will actually reduce the amount of protein we absorb. So maybe if you're looking to absorb more protein in less time, you need to consider having less fiber with each of those meals.
Okay, so you mentioned timing a few times there. Do I need to be getting a protein shake in straight after I come out of the gym? That's something I've definitely heard.
So there's a thing called the anabolic window, which traditionally speaking has been disproven and discredited, whereby you have to eat something within 2 hours of a training session. It's not entirely accurate, but there are accuracies associated with it. So if you have a high protein meal instantly after a training session, which has been quite demanding and is actually your body is clamoring out at that point for more protein because it needs to recover from that workout, it needs to repair then what we actually see is that you can process a bigger dose of protein in that period, and we actually see an increase in the amount of muscle protein synthesis that takes place to higher doses than 30 grams. So even at 40 grams, we see an increase in the amount of muscle protein synthesis that's statistically significant at that point. So there is a benefit to timing. The other thing that's kind of useful about that is with the anabolic window, though it doesn't necessarily hold true that you will gain more muscle or improve performance over time to a greater extent if you eat within that anabolic window. If you are training on consecutive days or you're training fairly frequently, having food within that immediate 2-hour window post a training session does lead to faster recovery, does lead to faster replenishment of glycogen stores, and therefore will lead to better performance in subsequent sessions.
Okay, so there are some real benefits there. What does this all look like in terms of a sort of typical day of eating? How does it all fit in?
So realistically, the most important thing for you to consider when it comes to protein intake has to be the fact that you need to know how much protein your body needs based on the amount of exercise you do and the type of trainer that you are and your body weight and your own unique factors. Once you know how many grams of protein you need to consume, then you need to think about how you're going to split those up over the course of your day, whether you're going to have them evenly distributed across 6 meals, across 3 meals, across 2 meals, or maybe you're going to have higher doses at certain meals because you struggle to get protein in at certain times of day. So for instance, breakfast for me is quite a high carb base. However, I'll have more protein in my evening meal, and maybe you want to consider timing that high protein dose so that it comes straight after your workout so you can utilize it to a greater extent.
Okay. I'm not really about that macro counting life. Is there anything practical that I can do without counting macros?
So absolutely agree with you. There is an issue there with like having too much structure to your overall nutrition day. I would think that you do need to know roughly what your body needs, and you need to make steps towards that. Remember that no number is absolute, so realistically, have an idea in mind of what your target is, but operate within a range. And then instead of thinking about how you're going to plan so you get the exact number of grams in, think to yourself, okay, right, this portion of chicken contains 20 grams of protein, this portion of tuna contains 20 grams of protein. So long as I hit these portions of these different food groups, let's chuck in a vegan option because I don't want to anger anybody. So a portion of tempeh or a portion of seitan or a portion of tofu or something along those lines that is going to give you a high protein dose. Know roughly what's in each portion size and then plan accordingly to get enough of those sources and enough of those portions into your day to hit your target.
Okay, that's really useful. And what are your thoughts on supplementation? Do I need to be having protein shakes, protein bars? Are they useful?
So supplements in general are exactly that. They're only there to supplement your diet. So if you can get your protein source from natural food sources, then absolutely do so. There's no real benefit to consuming protein in the form of a supplement, or in the form of a shake, or in the form of a bar. The benefit for me just comes from simplicity. So I know that I struggle to hit enough protein within my meals, so I take a shake just to supplement that and just to top myself up and get myself up to the right levels. It's also quite useful if you're looking to have a leaner source of protein. So for instance, a lot of vegans out there know that it's quite challenging for you to get protein without carbohydrates or fats alongside. By having a protein shake, you can easily hit your protein intake without having to add additional carbohydrates or additional fats to your meal.
Okay, so what are your favourite protein sources, both from real foods and also, the supplementation side?
So with protein sources, the important thing is to think about how complete is the protein source. So animal products pretty much all will provide you with a complete amino acid profile. So we have each protein is made up of amino acids, and we have certain amino acids that we can produce within our bodies, and certain amino acids that we can't. We need to try and make sure that we consume all of the ones that we can't produce, as those are the essential amino acids, and that's quite an easy thing to do if we're consuming animal products. If you're not consuming animal products and you are consuming vegan or vegetarian sources, An easy way to get a complete protein is by combining 2 different protein sources. So by having things like a bean and grain combination, you can almost always form some kind of complete protein from that. Personally, I quite like having like chickpeas and rice with some chopped tomatoes and just like a classic Hispanic dish.
Sounds delectable. And
Very
what
tasty
about
cooking.
what about supplement brands?
Supplement brands. So I tend to stick with my protein just because of the fact it's easy and it's easy to get delivered to you. But I do really like Optimum Nutrition and Kinetica as well. I think they're both really good high quality sources of protein. Remember, if you're an athlete, then you want to make sure that your protein source is drug tested, because most of them are produced in some kind of factory that might be processing other things that you don't necessarily want to be taking as an athlete. So yeah, think about that and make sure you get something that is trusted by sport, approved, so that you aren't going to end up in any trouble.
I will bear that in mind. I think that's covered all my questions for today. Thanks, Anne.
Very welcome. Time to get back to the king.